Habits and Health, episode 61.
Welcome to the Habits and Health podcast, where we believe creating healthy habits should be easy. Brought to you by an educator and coach for anyone who wants to create a healthier life. Here's your host, Tony Wynyard.
Welcome to another edition of Habits and Health, the podcast where we help you with habits to improve behaviour around certain areas of health that you'd like to improve. Today's guest, Nicola Singleton. She appeared on BBC One's Doctor in the House 5 years ago with Dr Rangan Chatterjee and has gone from being housebound to recovering from ME, chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And we're going to discuss a lot more about that whole journey and how it was being on that show with Dr Chatterjee and what she's up to now. So that's this week's episode. If you know anyone who would get some real value from this, maybe someone who is suffering from one of those issues, please do share the episode with them, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Habits and Health, my guest today is Nicola Singleton. How are you, Nicola?
Hi, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. And where? I know you're in England, obviously, but where in England are you?
The Northwest.
So whereabouts?
Chorley.
And is that where you come from?
No, and I don't come from very far away. I primarily lived in Bolton most of my life, and then I moved into Harwich 20 years ago.
Okay.
And then last March, we moved into Chorley.
Right. And how do you find Chorley?
Oh, I love it. Where I am, there's nice places to walk. There's lots of parks, lots of cafes, which I do enjoy. So yeah, it's a really nice place to be.
And how would you describe what it is that you do, Nicola? How do you help people? What is it you do?
Well, mainly I home educate. So that's my day-to-day thing now. We moved our youngest from school when he was 7. He's now 12. I do I do run a Facebook group called To Be a Better Me, which really is just sharing with other people what helped me to get well from chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia.
Right.
But yeah, day to day, I'm just a mum and I help out at rugby, and I'm a parent governor of a college, and that keeps me busy. And
so you touched upon just now about helping people with chronic fatigue syndrome and so on. So how did that come about? What's your journey behind? So I gather you had both of those syndromes however many years ago. So how did that all happen?
Really quite by chance. I'd been ill from the moment I found out I was pregnant with Zachary, who is now 12. It was just almost like from the moment I found out I was pregnant, I just never woke up. It took 2 years from him being born to sort of be diagnosed with chronic fatigue, because at first I thought it was thyroid, and I do have a thyroid issue, but it became much more than not just a thyroid issue, but it became more than that. And then that was really, I think all the way through my 30s, I kept saying I was retired. It felt like I was retired because I wasn't really capable of looking after my children, because exhaustion had really set in at that point. And then one day I saw an email, because my middle boy, who's now 18, he was very temporarily in a modelling agency. So an email came through, which mentioned a TV programme called Doctor in the House. And I think for me at the time, I was walking up to where I lived at that point, and it was up a steep hill, and it was really, really difficult for me to even get home. So I paused just to kind of get a breather, and I'd read the email, and and I thought it was the prospect of having a doctor to come into my house to actually, listen to what had been going sort of wrong. And I knew deep down inside that life had to be better than how I was living it. And I just didn't know how. Right. So it wasn't so much the prospect of being on TV, it was more of actually having a doctor to spend some quality time with me and not just the 10 minutes that you usually get if you're lucky.
Right.
And then from there, we was interviewed by the TV company. They did like a mock situation. Right. So they come to your house with the cameras and see if we can follow instructions and such. And I've also, it was my middle boy who swung that for us, because he came out with a totally inappropriate joke, but that had everyone laughing. And then from there, we were chosen to appear on Doctor in the House.
And for those, we have quite a few listeners in other countries, in the States and many other countries. So that, if I remember, wasn't that on BBC? Was that?
It was on BBC One, but it has been aired in gosh, I think about at least 50 countries worldwide.
And for those who aren't familiar, who have never heard about the program, could you explain more about the concept and how it all works?
Yes, Doctor in the House, and the second series, which differed slightly from the first series, it compared kind of two families over a series of 4 weeks, where there were sort of commonalities. So in my situation, it was fatigue. And basically the doctor comes into your house, spends a lot of time with you and tries to improve your health. And that's recorded over a period of about 6 to 7 weeks to see whether getting to the root cause of the problem could have obviously a positive impact, with your health further down the line. I was a very difficult customer.
Well, and also the doctor in question is, many of our listeners, even if they're not familiar with that program, they'll have probably heard the name of the doctor because he's pretty well known now with all the books he's written and the podcasts that he releases. It's Dr Rangan Chatterjee, isn't it?
It is Dr Rangan Chatterjee.
And so were you familiar with him before he actually, you were in this TV show?
No, not at all. I did Google him once I'd been accepted in the TV programme, so I kind of had an inkling, but I didn't know what functional medicine was, and I certainly didn't know what lifestyle medicine was.
Right.
And it was all through meeting him and sort of listening to what he was saying that I kind of began to understand what he was about.
And so how was the experience?
It was, oh my gosh, it was the most toughest and exciting and nerve-wracking and scary time ever. Right. But I would relive it over and over again because it's not often you get the chance to really be pushed out your comfort zone, right, and really examine yourself as well. And he taught me so much in that short space of time that I didn't always understand or appreciate at that time.
Right.
But he's a lovely guy.
And so I get the impression from what you're saying, you were the main focus to he was trying to help, or were there other people in the house who also had issues that he was trying to help as well?
It was mainly me.
Right.
But it was more focused on me. There was my eldest son too, who has underactive thyroid, so he was looking at helping him with that. But it was mainly really just to try and improve my health. And with every episode he did, it usually focused on one or two members of the family.
Right. And did your thinking around the whole... So was the main issue, was it the chronic fatigue syndrome? How your thoughts about that at the beginning, before he came and lived with you, and after he left you, how different was your thinking around that whole thing?
To be fair, it took a long time to really understand more, because I'd had, obviously, the exhaustion that comes with chronic fatigue, and then I had fibromyalgia, which is very, very painful.
Right.
But on top of that, I had anxiety and depression and a whole host of things that had been going wrong for a long period of time. By the time Rangan left, which was about 7 weeks into it, the fibromyalgia had gone, right, which was phenomenal in itself, because I had a gut issue, which was that he diagnosed and then treated. But I didn't really feel the benefit of that until the fatigue lifted. And actually, when he left, the fatigue was much worse.
Right.
So it took time. But in effect, what he did, he created like a little snowball that then, got bigger and bigger and bigger over time to full recovery. So, but it wasn't immediate. The fibromyalgia thing was great.
Right.
But as daft as it sounds, looking back at that time, I didn't really appreciate being pain-free, right, because the exhaustion was worse. But I think that's just because my body had been going through such an upheaval.
Right. And so how much longer did it take after he was no longer involved? How much longer?
I think for the fatigue to go, I think I knew I was fully recovered by the August. So they came and filmed in September, October. The fibromyalgia had gone must have been within the first 4 or 5 weeks.
Right.
Because it almost like it disappeared overnight. And then after that, the exhaustion was still there. But then I started to look at the more lifestyle medicine approaches of meditation and the breathing techniques and to be less stressed. And so I think I realised by August, because as we've just mentioned, I live in the northwest of England. We went watching a musical that was in London. Right. And we decided to go on the bus because there was 5 of us, it was cheaper. And it was a 24-hour trip. And I thought coming back, I'd really pay for it. I've been paid back with the chronic fatigue.
Right.
And actually, I was no worse than anybody else in my family.
Right.
And I think it's really at that point, I thought, I don't feel any worse than anybody else.
Right.
So that was a timeline.
And has it stayed like that since then? I mean, how do you feel now?
Yeah, I don't have any fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue symptoms that stop me from living day to day.
And yet, aren't people often told that when you have some of those conditions, that's it, you have them forever?
Yes, which I find so frustrating. But yes.
And so all the different lifestyle changes he helped you with, you mentioned the breathing and the meditation and so on. Were there any of them those that you found the most difficult to change?
Oh, good question. I think really it was learning to be kinder to myself, as daft as that may sound.
Right.
I was always a perfectionist. I have very high standards. I still have high standards.
Right.
But I didn't like myself. And I think I didn't look after myself because I really didn't value me.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing really was learning that, comparison really is the thief of joy, is the saying goes. And I realised, I didn't need to keep comparing myself. And it was about learning how to let go of things that I found stressful, not always holding on to it, not bearing grudges and things like that. So I think really it was more learning how to relax and relaxing well. Because I thought I'd been relaxing for years on the couch even when I had the chronic fatigue. But actually I wasn't. I was lying there, but I wasn't actually resting. So I think the biggest takeoff for me was learning how to relax and learning how to deal with stress better than how I had been.
I'd love to dig into that a bit more, what you just said about you thought you were relaxing when you were just lying on the sofa, but that wasn't really. It wasn't the same thing as what he taught you. So could you expand on that? What does that mean? Why was it that you weren't relaxing when you were lying on the sofa?
Because lying on the sofa didn't stop me from feeling guilt that I couldn't be a decent mum at that point. My youngest was 2, and luckily I had a friend who was also a childminder, so she helped out a lot. But I wasn't actually capable of looking after him.
Right.
I wasn't really capable of doing much at all. So I would be lying on the couch but feeling guilty because obviously my husband was in at work and he'd do a really long day at work and then come home and have to do everything at night as well. Right. Including he'd always have to get up during the night when Zachary was born. Right. And he'd be feeding, for example. So you can be lying on the couch and you can outwardly look as if you're resting, but inside I think the guilt was just huge.
Right. And so when he was teaching you the meditation and the self-compassion and so on, did you find it quite easy to adapt to doing those things, or was it quite foreign?
Absolutely not. We went to an amazing place actually in Manchester, a breathworks place, and it just totally freaked me out because it was so alien doing an effective guided meditation.
Right. I
don't like closing my eyes in front of people for some weird reason I can't even explain. To this day I still don't like that. And I was like, how? And it was promoted as sort of it would help fibromyalgia, and I just couldn't figure that out. And if it doesn't make sense to me, I straight away put a block in front of it mentally.
Right.
So no, meditation did not come naturally.
Right. And when was meditation the only type of breath work you were doing, or were you doing other types of breath work as well?
No, it was mainly just outward, like your outward breath being longer than your inward breath. That was it. And so I didn't do any different techniques. How
long do you think it took you to really feel like you were accomplishing something, that it was really helping you?
Well, I was sent to the Optimum Health Clinic in London.
Right.
And again, it was obviously it was. I don't know if you've heard of the Optimum Health Clinic, but it is there for chronic fatigue and things like they are specialists. And I remember going, I had all these expectations that this is the place to be. But one thing they taught me is they taught me why it was important to meditate, whereas I hadn't really understood that before. Because obviously the negative side of having a camera there is you're on a very strict criteria in terms of time. So we were trying to, and I didn't always see Rangan. He wasn't there every time that filming took place.
Right.
So he was like, look, this is what we're doing. but not always why.
Right.
So I didn't understand why we was doing some breath work at that point. Right. And also, to be fair, I was still drugged up at that point on medication, so it could have explained it, but that didn't sink in at that point.
Right.
So it was all when I went to the optimal health clinic, and that was in the April. So I kind of then understood why meditations were important, and then I thought, what have I got to lose?
Right. But it sounds like from what you just described that some of that process of them actually filming you was stressful in itself.
Oh, yes. And I don't regret it, obviously. And they were really respectful. There were things I said I do not want to be shown on TV, and they were very respectful of that.
Right.
So it's not I'm critical of them being there, but obviously it is pressure because you're aware that there's a camera there.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So what now for people listening who maybe, we might have some people listening who do have chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, etc. What would you say to them? Why is it that meditation is so helpful?
I think it's one part of a whole thing, a whole packet, I'm trying to get the words right, a whole spectrum of things that you can try.
Right.
And I think for me, what helped me is I didn't realise that my body had been constantly stuck in the fight or flight mode.
Right.
So my ANS was always risen. Now, I didn't understand that at that time, but that had been that way for about 20 years. So what breathing did for me was to actually make me realise that my body was always tense.
Right.
So it taught me how to actually relax my body.
Right.
And I think, your body, from everything that I've learned, is your body cannot heal or even begin to heal if it's still really, really stressed.
Right.
So I think it's vital that people learn how to relax themselves in whatever way, they can.
Yeah.
To even then begin to do everything else to help your body to heal, or at least potentially heal.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of the Habits and Health podcast, where we believe creating healthy habits should be easy. If you are looking for deep support to create the health and life you want, we invite you to consider one-on-one coaching sessions with Tony. Coaching sessions give you personalised guidance to fit your unique goals and life situation. Only a limited number of spots are available, but you can easily get started by booking a free introductory call at tonywynyard.com. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Do you think that's an area that people who do have those conditions struggle with to take on something like meditation and breathwork?
Quite possibly. I mean, I was really dismissive of it when I was ill because you have all these symptoms and all these, issues. You think, why would breathing make a difference? It's just breathing, without understanding the philosophy behind it and how powerful breathing actually is.
Yeah.
So I think and also it's kind of, when you are exhausted, it almost feels like it's something else to do.
Right.
And you've got enough to do just trying to get through day by day.
Right.
So I think sometimes and still in my situation, my own mental attitude towards it was quite dismissive.
Right. And you mentioned about how important the self-compassion was for helping you look at that differently. And was that difficult to get over the negative self-talk? How long did that take?
Yeah. I think it took about 6 months for me to begin to understand, what is the purpose of feeling so negative about yourself and what does it actually achieve?
Right.
The more clearer thought that I got, it took, because obviously initially I was withdrawing from medication and things like that, so it did take a while. So yeah, it took about 6 to 8 months to sort of understand that more.
And I would imagine that probably eliminating that negative self-talk has given you a completely different perspective on life in general.
Yeah.
So, how has that changed your life?
Well, it's so difficult to. I think really, in essence, I just value myself more.
Right.
I don't work, and if you think the majority of people, the first thing they always say is, "Oh, what do you do?"
Right.
Everything's. What do you do usually means what's your work. You're defined by the job you do.
Mm.
And I don't work. I raise my family and I home educate.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that. Before I would look at sort of my friends who have professional jobs, my husband has a professional job, and I would feel so inadequate. But now, frankly, I really don't care. And I think that's freeing.
But you're also an inspiration for many people with your Facebook group, because it was one person from your Facebook group who suggested that I speak to you in the first place because of, she said, Nicola is so helpful. Like this particular person has chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. And she was saying about how helpful you are and how inspirational you are. And that was one of the reasons I reached out to you in the first place.
I was really flattered, actually. And I did mention that in my group. So the lady came forward, and I was just, all along, my whole thing was, if I got help, I wanted to be able to pay that forward. Right. And if I could just help one more person, right, then that would really make me feel good.
Right.
And when I realised, because she commented that it was her, and I was just incredibly touched that just sharing my experience has helped someone else. I am not an inspiration. I must admit, I do hate that word with a passion. There is nothing inspirational about me in that way. It's just I got lucky and I'm stubborn, and I think being lucky, having a bit of luck, and then putting a ton of work in, because it did take work and still takes work. And I'm not perfect. I'd hate for anyone to think, oh yes, I have it all sussed, because I really don't. And I do make mistakes quite frequently, but it's learning from those, and it is cushioning yourself with that compassion. So yeah, that just really touched me. It's like the fact that lady, spoke to you and then you reached out to me. It was incredibly flattering. But
it also shows how helpful so many people are finding what you do, and the suggestions and the example that you're setting to so many people. It is helping people, clearly.
I wanted to create a safe space, because one thing that happened with me after doing the program Doctor in the House is I got a ton of criticism, because people, and I understand it to a point, and Rangan was way more compassionate about the people who gave me a bad time than I am, to be fair. When I was ill and I used to hear about recovery stories, I just didn't read them because I wasn't in that place to read them. Right. But I never negated them, and I never doubted them. I never questioned them, because it wasn't my story to do that with. Right. But every time I tried to reach out, and after the show, before I started my own Facebook group, right, to say, look, there are things that you can do to try and help yourself. In effect, I was called a charlatan, and I was trying to sell something, and I've never tried to sell anything. Right. This lifestyle medicine is freely given. It's not something you pay for. Right. But people didn't understand that. And as much as I tried to reach out and say, look, you can be helped. There's things you could try. It may not work. It might work. So I got fed up of being criticised and told that I must never have been ill in the first place, because at that time in the place I was in, I found that to be really, really hurtful, because I knew I'd been ill. I didn't need somebody else to tell me that, I mustn't have been ill. And it not only does it negate my experience, it also negates my entire family's experience. And obviously my illness didn't just affect me. So really it was my husband who set up the To Be a Better Me group. Right. Because I wanted a safe space where, my whole focus in that group is recovery. Right. So it's not about talking about how you feel on a day-to-day basis, because everybody in that group knows how it is on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. But they can reach out if they're having a particularly tough time. But it's more about sharing things that have helped them, from a lifestyle medicine perspective. So I've tried to, and I worked really hard actually to try and keep it a safe space and a fun space. We do, we like it to be fun as well. Right. But it's just, I don't want people to, because again, I don't know whether you're aware, but even in the, chronic fatigue community, it's like there's two separate groups. You've got the severe and you've got the mild, and the severe are always saying, well, at least you can do such and such thing to the mild group. And then the mild group is saying, well, you're bedbound, so you don't have to worry about doing anything else because you can't do anything else. But actually, each place on that spectrum you are of the chronic fatigue has its own limitations. So in my group, there's never a one-upmanship. If you're mild or classed as mild and you can still work, but you're still struggling, you're as welcome as somebody who's bedbound. Right. And it's just about sharing those experiences and trying to sort of help each other without feeling like, well, I'm worse than you. And because some people like to wear their illnesses like a badge of honour, and I hate all that. So that's not allowed in my group.
So how many people are in the group?
1,600 plus now.
Wow.
So it's not a huge group, but there's only me who's admin at the moment with a lovely guy. He's brilliant. He helps me. So it does keep me busy, but I enjoy it. It can be tough as well sometimes because you're always reminded of the illness.
Yeah.
But I do some of these people become friends,
right? And
I genuinely care about them, and I'm not as involved as much as I wish I could be. But I think after 5 years, I keep saying the same things. But then they'll say, "Well, remind us, it's fine."
And I imagine over the 5 years that you've had that group, there's probably been quite a few success stories in the group. People have really improved themselves.
I think so, yeah. Because what tends to happen is those who are doing well then go quiet,
right? Which
is good because they get on with their lives,
right?
And that's how it should be. They get on with their lives.
Yeah.
I know people have improved, and I know some people haven't.
Right.
And it's I think just being aware of all the things you can do to help yourself with whatever success that may bring.
Yeah.
Is better than having nothing.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned before when you were talking about the negative, the criticism you were receiving, and the way you worded it was it used to hurt you, as if it now maybe do you look at it differently and it doesn't hurt you so much now?
It doesn't hurt me now.
Right.
It sounds awful, but I really don't care.
Right.
About what other people, strangers, think in terms of whether I was ill or not. I can't control what they're thinking.
Right.
It's meant is, and I think it is a shame, is you just stop reaching out. So I've stopped reaching out. The main fibromyalgia group on Facebook, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that particularly, but they were really, really mean, and it was really quite cruel, and that was allowed. And I just thought, no, I don't need that. I didn't appreciate that at the time. But now it's like I said, I do feel for people. I know how it feels to have fibromyalgia. I still remember it.
Right.
And I do have all the sympathy and empathy in the world for what we're going through. But there's no need for meanness.
But also it shows how far you've come with your own self-compassion, that no longer, you don't allow it to get to you probably the way you would have a few years ago.
Before I used to feel like I had to justify it.
Right.
But now I don't feel like I need to justify anything.
Right.
I'm not trying to label myself as somebody who's amazing and, I've got it all sussed and I'm great, and that's not what I'm about. So they can think what they like. I'm enjoying life. I'm lucky. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, yeah. So for people listening again who maybe are afflicted with these conditions, and from what I understand, there's no one treatment to solve these things, and there's so many different things that affect it, that contribute to it as well. And so every person will have a different treatment plan, I presume.
Absolutely. And I think, it's very difficult as well because it's really trying to find out what that root cause is.
Right.
So for me, it was a gut issue and it was chronic stress.
Right.
For some people, it could be more dietary. For some people, it could be something else going on.
Right.
The things that you promote, obviously, in your podcast and what you talk about are the same things that can help everybody. I think, looking at, because obviously Rangan's book's the one that I know the most, the 4-pillar plan, looking at how, what you're eating, how you sleep, how you move, and how you rest. I think no matter where you're at, if you can sort of look at those 4 areas, right, you can help yourself to whatever extent, and that's really what, I think is really good about lifestyle medicine.
So when people first come into the group, I'm just wondering, is it ever a situation where they do believe that by joining your group, they're going to everything is going to be right, they're going to find out all the information that, but are there some people that don't realize that it is different for every single person that joins or every single person that has that condition?
I think what the group has done is I think it gives hope to people. There's a lady who's just joined very recently, and she said for the first time in 2 years, she feels like she has permission to rest.
Right.
Like I said, I don't ever set the group up to that I know all the answers, because I really don't know all the answers. But I am a strong believer and I'm passionate about lifestyle medicine. So, I do talk about that often in the way that we can all try and help ourselves. But that lady, she'd been going to the doctors and she'd been really struggling, and she'd been told to exercise. And although I'm not at all negative about exercising, I do enjoy it myself. And I did try to do it when I was ill. Sometimes actually your body can't cope with that and it does need a rest. But that isn't promoted.
Right.
So this lady was trying to do the exercise that she was advised by the GP. She also used to walk a lot, but she found that she was walking, she found that her mobility was actually decreasing by exercising, which is exactly what happened with me.
Right.
So she read some of the things that were in the group and she said, "You've actually given me some hope that for the first time in 2 years," because she'd only been diagnosed, not only, but had been diagnosed 2 years ago.
Right.
And it's things like that I think I don't really think of, but actually for her, just being in the group, and she's very flattering with the group, and it's nice because that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
And it's, so I think I'd like to think it's people don't think, oh, they join the group and they have all the answers, but maybe they can read something that they've never thought of before and can try.
Right. So with all the experience you've gained over the last 5 years and getting yourself through those conditions as well, can you ever see yourself doing something like writing a book yourself?
Well, my husband keeps saying I should do, but I think it'd be the most boring book on the planet. So it's like, I'm not very exciting. So it's just, but I think there's a need out there for, a book about sort of the, I suppose something like similar to my story.
Yeah.
But it always seems it makes me feel I'm squirming. It makes me feel very uncomfortable.
I can see you physically squirming, literally. As soon as I asked you the question, like, your body language. But you're putting yourself down in a way, but your experience is so unusual, maybe, because you're not coming at it from a doctor's perspective. You had that fortune to be treated with one of the best doctors in the UK for a period of weeks. But also, not only did you get through it yourself, but the amount of people that you've helped in the last 5 years, you've got such a different story to most people on earth. I think the book will be far better than you are kind of, what you're portraying.
Well, that's really nice to hear. I suppose you take the grief for granted, don't you? I'm there, it's what I do, so it's not something that I think of from that perspective. But like I said, for me, it was always a passion. I always thought, if I was lucky enough to get some help, then I know what it feels like, because I didn't know anyone when I was ill. And that was isolating in itself. I think usually a family, if you're lucky, you may have a couple of people who understand. And I was lucky because my husband understood. But like my dad, for example, he just thought I was bored. He thought I needed a job. He had no concept that I wasn't able to work at that point.
Some of those things you've just said, Nicola, are the reason you need to write the book, because so many people don't understand it, and there are so many people who don't know where to turn. They're the reasons why you do need to write the book, I think. Okay,
food for thought. Definitely.
Well, let's stay on the subject of books. I mean, there's a question I always ask all my guests is, and I know that we were discussing this before we started recording, and you love books generally. So is there a book or maybe a couple of books that come to mind that have really moved you for any reason, any time in your life can you think of?
I think when I was at uni, so a very long time ago now, I used to love it. I can't remember the full name. It was Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Okay.
I think it was The House of the Spirits. Is it House of the Spirits? I can't remember. But it was very different to anything else that I'd read. And it was about magical realism. So I think that one has stuck in my mind, albeit quite vague now. I need to read it again. But I've always loved the classics. I've always loved the Bronte sisters. Right. And I've always loved, you can't beat a good romance story. Although in my house with 4 fellas, it's like really, Mum? Really? But like for now, for example, I'm rereading Alice in Wonderland, my 12-year-old, because we were mad. And I love that. And some of the sayings, the quotes in there, like we're all mad here. And I think, all the best people are. I think it's just fab. So it's kind of nice with him because we're learning. I'm refamiliarising myself with, some really good books. But so yeah, not one in particular really, other than that the magical realism one was very different to what I'd read.
Right.
But I think I love books, and I love, I have bath. I like to read in the bath, so I always have my bathroom reading, and then I've got a nice bookcase with the ones that look good, but I've not read in a long time.
So, Nicola, if people want to find out more about you, your social media, if someone wants to join your group, so where would they look?
Really, it's just on Facebook, and it's called To Be a Better Me,
Okay.
which is obviously a play on words of ME chronic fatigue. So I keep a very low profile elsewhere.
Right.
I'm quite old fashioned. I need to get more modern, but for now it's just Facebook.
And to finish, do you have a quotation that you particularly like?
There's a few, and it was actually the one that was in my kitchen, which when Dr Chatterjee came in, the TV programme came in, it was like on the back wall, and that one I've got it in front of me so I can remember it correctly, and it was just like, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain.
Right.
And I think when I was ill, it really resonated with me, that particular quote. I think there's always going to be things that happen. There's always going to be stressful events. There's always going to be something. But life is beautiful. And I think we can get so bogged down in the misery of some of the things that are going on that we forget that. Right. So that quote for me kind of said, well, yeah, things might be not great, because my health hasn't been linear the whole way through going up. There's been other issues that have gone in between, and it's taken a lot of perseverance. But I just think that quote particularly is just, I'm a massive fan of. And then the other one is, I'm a huge fan of Pink, right. The singer Pink. I absolutely love her. And there's two things there. And one of them is like, the definition of stupid is wasting your opportunity to be yourself. Because I think everybody has a uniqueness and everybody is good at something. And I think for me now, I have stopped comparing myself to other people. And I'm happy with who I am. And I'm not always trying to strive to be better than what I am, to do more or whatever. I'm really content, and I think that's made a massive difference to how I look at things. And then the other one is, I'm learning to be brave in my beautiful mistakes, which is from a song, Crystal Ball. Because again, life is about making mistakes. But I think the difference is if you can learn from those mistakes, rather than repeating the same mistakes and not getting anywhere, there's so much value to that. And so I like, those are the ones that really resonate with me.
Well, Nicola, it's been a real pleasure. So thank you for the last sort of half an hour, or just over 35 minutes. It's been a real pleasure. And I think a lot of people are going to really, really benefit from this episode. So thank you.
Thank you for the invite. I was very touched. Thank you.
Next week is episode 62, and it is with a guy called Arthur Taniyelian. That's a name that's not easy to roll off the tongue. Arthur he's a breathwork instructor he's an instructor in a few different breathing methods. So there's a method called the Buteyko method, the oxygen advantage, Wim Hof, who many people are familiar with, breathology, and he's combined the knowledge he's gained from all these different breathing methodologies, and there's a couple of others that he does as well. And he helps people, and depending on what problems the people that he's working with have, he uses aspects of these different breathing methodologies to help the clients that he's working with. He's based in Switzerland. It's a fascinating conversation. So that's next week's episode with Arthur Taniyelian, which, as I said, is not the easiest name to pronounce. If you know anyone who gets some value from the information that Nicola shared with us, anyone who's got ME or chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, please do share the episode with them. And I hope you have a great week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Habits and Health Podcast, where we believe creating healthy habits should be easy. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Sign up for email updates and learn about coaching and workshop opportunities at tonywinyard.com. See you next time on the Habits and Health Podcast.
Next week, episode 61 with Nicola Singleton. Nicola appeared on BBC One's Doctor in the House 5 years ago with Dr Rangan Chatterjee, and has gone from being housebound to recovered from ME, CFS and Fibromyalgia. And she's going to talk about the journey she went through during that recording of that episode, how Rangan Chatterjee was able to help her, and what's happened since then. It's a very interesting story. So that's next week, episode 61 with Nicola Singleton. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please do share this with someone who would get some real value from it, and I hope you have a great week.